And so I think we're going through a very fundamental shift. In the 20th century, you had the organization man. You got ahead by being agreeable, by fitting within the context, and by moving up the hierarchy. I don't think that's the way the world is anymore. I think the world is now completely online. Everybody's like a node on a network. The people who are winning are the pattern breakers. People who are winning are the ones who change the rules and tell the rest of us how to think about it. Being taught to be a pattern follower was a durable strategy. I don't think it is anymore. I don't think the rewards for being a rule follower are what they once were, but nobody gave anybody the memo.
Welcome back to another episode of the Sales Gravy podcast. On this episode is my very first venture capitalist in 18 years of podcasting. I've got Mike Maples Jr. on, who is the author of a killer book called Pattern Breakers. You're going to love this conversation. Before we get started, I want you to go check out Sales Gravy University. Sales Gravy University is where sales teams all over the world come to learn how to sell, to learn the tools, the tactics, and the techniques to sell more. And if you've never taken a course before on Sales Gravy University, you can use the code FREECOURSE. That's the code FREECOURSE. Just go to learn.salesgravy.com, learn.salesgravy.com. Mike, welcome to Sales Gravy.
Thanks for having
Hey, really super to have you on. Just real quickly, you're like seriously the first venture capitalist I've ever had. You're the founding partner at Floodgate. You've invested in some killer companies like Okta and Outreach and Twitch. All of my studio team are hanging out on Twitch all day long. So apparently a really cool company. And you are you're known for coining the term thunder lizard. So let's just start there. What the heck is a thunder lizard?
Yeah, so thunder lizards, the metaphor comes from Godzilla. And Godzilla was hatched from radioactive atomic eggs, swam across the ocean and emerged with an attitude, and then started breathing fire, swiping holes in buildings, and then eating train cars like sausage links. And so that was my metaphor for a startup. It starts out as this small radioactive mutation creature and then grows into something gigantic, and everybody has to react to it coming out of seemingly nowhere.
I love that. But you've made a living choosing companies that are different than other startups. One of the things that I read that you had written was that there are companies out there that are pattern breakers and they do things completely different and they become these Godzillas. They become these thunder lizards. And then there are these other companies that have similar backgrounds, have similar opportunity, but they never really launch. They never really get anywhere. And you've made a living finding the thunder lizards. Can you tell me a little bit about what are you looking
Yeah.
for, and how is that how have you been able to be such a good, I guess, I don't how about what's the best way of saying this? How are you able to see what other people can't see?
Yeah, and it turns out to be remarkably similar to some of the stuff I've read in your book. So I've read about your ideas on prospecting, and what you have to do when you're a startup is you have to force a choice and not a comparison. So business is never a fair fight. The only question is who fights unfair. And so the default is that the incumbents have the unfair advantage because they have the advantage of the incumbency. So when you're a startup, you have to change the subject. And the only way you do that is by changing the rules. And so I look for startups that are going to force a choice, that are going to do something that can't be reconciled with anything that's come before.
I've never heard anybody say it that way, and it's freaking brilliant. Forcing a choice, and we talk a lot about competitive displacement. So we're going into a business where there's a competitor already there. How do we force them to choose? So I don't want to deal with people who don't have to make a decision. I want to force a decision.
That's
So
right.
so tell us a little bit more about that. When you say force a
Yeah.
choice, I mean we're talking at the micro level
Right.
at a sales conversation, but you're talking about an entire company forcing a
Yeah. So
choice.
let's just take an example of something we've probably all heard of. Have you seen the Cybertruck, the
Yeah.
Tesla Cybertruck?
Yeah.
So do you like it?
No.
Okay, you probably don't like it. I'm warming up to it, but But, like, you might like it, you might dislike it, you might think it's ridiculous, right? Like, I thought he was joking when I first saw the launch. I was like, "Is he really gonna ship that?" But here's one thing nobody ever does. Nobody ever says, "How does it compare to a Ford F-150?" Right? It's
Yeah.
like, it defies the comparison trap completely. And so, he forces a choice in the sense of, live in my future or don't. But you can't reconcile a Cybertruck with a Ford F-150. And startups are that way. The first time you got in a Lyft or an Uber, tried ride sharing, nobody said, "How's that different from a taxi?" The first time you tweeted, nobody said, "How's that different from blogs?" And so that's what you want when you're a startup. You want to have something that can't be compared, that totally defies comparison. And you want to find all of the people and only those people who value your advantage. If you're Elon Musk, you don't want to spend time with people who don't care about Cybertrucks because they're not going to buy. You only want to spend people who are magnetized to the Cybertruck. So that's what you want to do in your startup. You want to find the rare set of co-conspirators who believe your different future. And then that's the prospecting job in many ways.
And you're right about the Cybertruck. I don't really like it, but when one drives by, you turn your head. You're looking at it,
Yeah.
and very much like you'll get used to it. It's kind of like the first time you ever hear a song, you don't really like the song, but you see it enough times, you start to like it. And I'm assuming that's sort of the mode or the modality of a pattern breaker. They do something that's completely different, and then it becomes normal.
That's right. It's a lot like other things that start out as a heresy. When Copernicus said that the sun is at the center and not the earth, he's put under house arrest by Pope, and the church didn't admit for hundreds of years that he was right. And so, what usually happens with these great ideas is they start out looking weird, they make people uncomfortable. People are used to their habits, and they don't like it when you mess with their heads. And so, what happens with these new ideas is a small subset of people are inclined to believe it first, and they join the movement, and eventually the movement gathers steam and becomes the mainstream view. But in the early days, it seems like heresy. It makes people uncomfortable, it hits different. And, it's, the challenge of the founder of a startup to sort of say, "I don't have to please everybody. I only have to find the people who believe what I believe, and that's my prospecting job, is to find people who are ready to move with me to the different future." The people who aren't ready to move, they're not gonna buy no matter what you say, and whatever objections they have, there's no way you can handle those objections. And so what you have to do is spend your time, your limited ergs of energy with only the people who value your advantage.
I love it. And we think about this in fanatical prospecting. We talk about this when we're turning around objections. Is we talk about breaking a pattern. I want to say something that is different than what everybody else is saying, so that now you pay attention. And it's very similar to the Cybertruck. When the Cybertruck goes by, you look at it because all of a
Yes.
sudden it looks different than anything you've ever seen before. So it grabs your attention. You don't turn your head every time a Ford F-150 comes by because you've seen a million of them. And the same thing when I'm dealing with a prospect, I want to say something when they're giving me an objection, when they're saying no, that
Mm.
grabs their attention because they're not expecting it, and then it makes their executive brain turn on, so now they have to actually process the information that I'm throwing at them. Um,
Yeah.
real quickly on entrepreneurs, so, like, how do you how w maybe a better way of saying this is, what are the patterns that define pattern breakers? How oxymoronish is that? But, I mean, what are the patterns that when you look at these entrepreneurs, these are the people that instantly get it?
The first thing is that they think different, and so they show up in the world differently. They think independently. They don't, buy into the current set of assumptions, and so they know that their product has to be radically different. I like to say only by being radically different can you make a radical difference, and so they lean into that very aggressively. And then the second thing is they engage in pattern breaking actions. So you mentioned Twitch earlier. Justin Kahn, who was one of the co-founders, his prior company, he was going out of business and he decided to sell it, and he ended up selling it on eBay for $250,000. And I didn't even know that's possible to do. And so the pattern breaking founders also have this ability to do things that don't seem normal, not conventional, not following any normal playbooks or recipes for getting things done. And they have to do that because the world is an inert place. And if you're going to move the world somewhere else, you have to act differently and you have to show up in the world in a different way. And so I'd say those are the main things. Thinking different and acting different are the two main things.
Do you think that's an innate ability, or is it something that people can learn to do in the process of running their business?
I think it's a combination. I think that some people are naturally creative, just like some scientists are naturally gifted or artists. But I also think that more people would benefit from trying to be different, no matter what they do. So, like, one time I was talking to somebody who ran a bakery, and he said, "Why should I read this book, about technology platforms and pattern breakers?" And I said, "Well, maybe you shouldn't, but to the extent that you should, there was a bakery that invented this thing called the cronut, and all of a sudden they were selling like hotcakes. Oh, no pun intended. And so I find that there's almost always an opportunity to be different. The 5 hour energy drink is basically the same ingredients as Coca-Cola. They put it in a smaller bottle. It costs more money, and they put it a different place in the supermarket. And so I just look at that and I think that's genius, right?
Mhm.
Why compete by trying to be a knockoff cola brand when you could be 5 hour energy drink and charge more money for less product? And so I look for that not just in technology, but just as a way of thinking about things. It's very hard in this crowded world and this noisy landscape to stand out unless you're truly different.
It's and I it, the 5 hour energy drink, back to forcing a choice. You're either going to get a Coke or you're going to get 5 hour energy. You can get both, but
Yeah.
it's looking at things differently. And you're exactly right. I sent a chat message to my marketing team this morning at 5:30 from the gym, and it said the way we're going to grab our audience attention in this world right now is that we have to be great. We can't be good. We have to be different. We have to be uh, testing things, listening to what people are paying attention to, and we have to find different ways to enable them and grab them. And I got Simone over here taking pictures of me. She is the epitome of a pattern breaker. But sometimes it helps to be young. She's 22 years old, 22 years old, and she
Okay.
thinks differently. So one of the
Yep.
things we've done as an 18-year-old company is bring people like Simone on who are pattern breakers in their own right to teach us how to think differently.
Yep. The one thing I'm curious about, Jeb, and one thing I was looking forward to about our conversation is when I was a software entrepreneur before I was in venture, I used to have this saying, go for the no. And so my theory was that when you're a startup, most people aren't going to like what you do. In fact, most people shouldn't
Mhm.
like what you do because that's human nature. Human beings are conditioned to like things. So if everybody likes your startup idea, it's too similar to what they already know. And so what I would do when I would sell is I would go for the no. I would sit down with a customer and I would say, it may not be appropriate for us to be talking.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, I solve a very particular problem for a particular customer. And if you don't have that problem and you don't need that software, I can give you your time back. And I would make body language as if I was working my way towards the door. And my goal was to metaphorically get them to grab me and pull me back in and say, no, I do have that problem. I do need that software. Tell me more. Where have you been all my life? And so that's what I've learned about startups is you don't have time to waste with people who don't want what you have. And so what you want to do is you want to find a way very quickly to tease out who does what you have and then sell to them and only them and tell them the truth with no tricks about what you do, but qualify out aggressively those people who don't value your advantage.
Yeah, I totally get that. And what you do, by the way, that process of, hey, we might not be the right fit for you.
Yeah.
We're not the right fit for everybody. This might not work for you. That in and of itself is a pattern breaker. In fact, it is the
Mm,
most powerful sales technique you can use. It's called a takeaway. Because if you
mm,
think about human beings, right, the one thing that we want more than anything else is what we can't have.
mm.
And if you're a salesperson, people are used to salespeople chasing them, right? They're used to you making them feel important because you really want their business. And when you say, "You know what? This might not work for you." And in your body language, right? Your body language, you're like leaning back and you're relaxed about it. I know that you had this experience. People go, "No, no, 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 no. I want to hear what you got to
Yeah.
say." Because the moment that you do that, you're not acting like every other salesperson out there. You're not eager. You're not pushing. You're not driving. You're willing to walk away. And that
Yeah.
grabs people's attention and pulls them in.
Yeah.
It is the most powerful pattern breaker in sales, period. And
So
you,
I looked at it like there's two kinds of people in the world when you're a startup. There's people who are desperate for what you do, and there's everybody else in the world who doesn't matter. And so we want to find the people who are desperate for what we do. And they say, "Where have you been all my life? I've never seen this before. There's nothing that compares with this. I've been waiting for something like this." And so I figure it's pretty stark the difference between those people and everybody else. You might as well figure that out
yeah,
quickly. And you're not going to convince people who aren't ready to move that they're going to be ready to move anytime soon. Don't waste your time with them. And it's tempting to try to counter their objections, but you're way better off finding the people who believe what you believe and then say, "Hey, we're going to co-create the future together. We're going to be co-conspirators
yeah.
in this journey."
And the reason that you can do that is because you can be fanatical about prospecting because there's, if you're going after, I was working with one startup, their entire prospect base was 8 million businesses because they sold to small
Yeah.
businesses. I mean, you got 8 million businesses out there and you're jacking around with this one person that can't make a decision. Move on, go to the person that can make a
Yeah.
decision. Just move a little bit faster.
That's right. In that situation, I'd say to that person, you have an infinitely large territory.
Yeah.
So pick whatever subsegment of the territory that is super high qualified and aggressively qualify everything else out. And, people tend to say they have this FOMO instinct. There's all these businesses. How could I let that opportunity stay on the table? But, what you want to do is say, "Hey, the fact that it's so big, it's addition by subtraction. And I'm going to sell to only the people who value my advantage and where it's a layup, not a 3-point shot," right? Where I,
Yeah.
I don't have to persuade them to buy. I only have to teach them to buy.
I love that. Um, Gosh, that is amazing. So I'm I just want to stop for a second. I don't have to persuade them to buy. I have to teach them to buy. Look at that. I'm forcing a choice. You're making me better, Mike. I'm gonna be writing a new book here really soon. It'll be Mikeisms. Um, so can I just step back for a second? I'm curious about this. What's it like to be a venture capitalist? Because from my perspective, I'm in the South. I'm not in the Silicon Valley. I've got clients out there, but I look at venture capitalists as like, I don't know, this sexy world of really smart people who make these crazy decisions and print money. I'm trying to
Mm.
figure out what's it really like?
Well, it's a very different way of thinking about business. So most people, like if Warren Buffett was here, he'd say, "Rule number one is don't lose money. Rule number two is don't forget rule number one." In my business, rule number one is don't say no to Airbnb because you would have made 5,000 times your money. And so it's the failures of imagination that get you in trouble. But I'm wrong 85% of the time. So if the very best venture capitalists in the world, the ones who make the most money of anybody, even they're wrong 85% of the time. The very best venture capitalists, though, in the case that they're right, in the 15% case, they're really right. And so what I need to do is bet on things that are likely to fail, but in the event that they succeed will be massive. And so that's just a very different way of thinking about decisions. It's like you're not worried about being wrong. Strikeouts don't matter, but base hits don't matter in my business either. Only grand slams matter. And so you're swinging really hard every time for a grand slam, knowing that you're going to usually strike out.
That's interesting. It's the same advice that I give my recruiting and hiring team is that we don't have to get base hits. We need to hit home runs. And it's okay if we strike out a bunch. Just when we get a home run, we're bringing in amazing people that can change the future for us. So go get home runs.
Yeah.
The so as a venture capitalist, what keeps you up at night? Like when you're laying in bed and you're thinking about your world, what do you worry about? What causes you anxiety? What are you stressed over?
Well, in any given year, there's about a dozen companies that are truly extraordinary. And I say to myself, every month, one of them is going to happen. And so we're sitting here doing this interview right now. What if one of those 12 companies is signing a term sheet with somebody because I got out hustled? Right? And so that's what keeps me up at night. Like, I know there's somebody out there. There's that needle in the haystack. There's that person who's gonna start something great, who's gonna start the next Facebook, the next Google, the next Tesla, somebody who's gonna change the future. And there's one of those happening every month. I gotta find that person at wherever they are. And every day that I don't find that person is a day that I worry that I lost them, that they found somebody else and that, they've already made a deal with somebody and they're off to the races. And I'm going to be watching from the sidelines.
That's funny because the exact same anxiety for me is that right now there is some company out there that could be my dream account that is looking at sales training and we don't know who they are. We're not having a conversation with them. And if you take a look at great salespeople, the best ones, the ones that are making $1 million a year in commissions, the thing that they worry about is that somebody, their competitor, is talking to a prospect and they're not having that conversation with them and they miss out.
That's right. And you'll notice we're not saying the goal is to talk to everybody. That I'm worried my competitors talking to more people than I'm talking to. I want to talk to the exact right person. And I worry that somebody is better at finding that exact right person and better at hustling their way to that person. And that's what keeps me up at night is that I'll get out hustled and out competed as it relates to finding that exceptional founder.
How do you go about that? Like, what's your process for prospecting and filling up your funnel with those opportunities?
It's tricky, but you ultimately have to have opinions about what are the interesting change events happening and who are the very smartest people paying attention to that. One of my favorite sayings is the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And so some people are living in the future before the rest of us. And my job is to go find those people and figure out if they're living in a valid future and then see if what they're building is going to apply to a whole bunch of people someday. And it's an ongoing struggle. You can spend whole months at a time wondering if you spent your time doing anything useful. And you can spend your time doing useless things easy. You can go to events and meet a bunch of people and they have a lot of discussions and feel like something happened when nothing really happened. And so you got to be, really focused on where those great founders are going to come from.
I think that again, another parallel to top performers in the sales space is that they're insanely stingy with their time. Like they recognize that you can spend a lot of time doing nothing, or you can have that time focused on the right opportunities. They have this discipline to bend probability in their favor. So if they only have so much time, they want to spend their time on their highest probability opportunity. So in your space,
Right.
even though you're only going to win 15% or 10% of the time, you want to make sure that in your pipeline you've got the highest probability businesses or startups that are going to give you the biggest chance of hitting that home run.
Right.
And that is anxiety driven. I mean, because you start thinking about that, that's tough because did you waste a bunch of time and then your competitor was someplace else?
Yeah, exactly. And
S-
and the issue for my job is that it's fun no matter what. All these people are living in the future and you're learning things every day that are exciting and that give you a lot of optimism. But, in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, there's an opportunity cost of my time. Did all the people that I met today rise to the bar of the types of people I should be meeting? Are they taking enough risk? Are they ambitious enough? Are they independent minded enough? And it's just you always feel like you could be better.
How much time do you spend mentoring and coaching the founders of the businesses that you do invest in?
A fair amount, but I've tried to really understand where I can add value and where I can't. So, like, I like to say that a great founder, it's kind of like Patrick Mahomes, and you can coach Patrick Mahomes, but you don't really tell him exactly how to do what he does, and you don't even know what he's going to do. He doesn't always even know. And so I think that the startup founders are a lot like that. They improvise, they come up with really good ideas. And what you do is you try to help them get perspective as they do that. And so there are things that I've learned about great startups that are pretty durable across all these great startups. And that's where you can help them the most because they don't have the perspective that you have. They haven't, this startup is their only startup. And so some of the problems and decisions that they face, you've had perspective on that they don't yet.
We've probably got an audience full of people who want to start a business or do a startup. Could you share just some of those patterns across startups that make startups successful that you mentor or coach the founders that you work with on?
Yeah. So the first thing I look for is something I call an inflection. So like the guys at Lyft, the iPhone 4S came out and it had a GPS chip in it. And because of that, you could now locate riders and drivers with an algorithm. So you could have had the idea for ride sharing before the iPhone 4S and it wouldn't have mattered. You couldn't have implemented it. But now all of a sudden you could. And so the inflection happens outside of the startup and it's a change event. It's like a wave for a surfer. And so you got to be a good surfer, but you got to be patient and find the right wave because the wave propels you to greatness. You have all the power of the ocean to harness. The second thing I look for is a fundamental insight, something that's non-consensus and right about the future. The Cybertruck is non-consensus. You got to be non-consensus if you're going to break the pattern and be different enough. And so that's the idea side of thing. And then on the action side of thing, I look for people who can start movements. I look for people who are great storytellers. I look for people who are somewhat disagreeable because a great startup is fundamentally a provocative act and it's a disagreement with the president. The president will fight back. So I want somebody who's going to be true to the mission and fight for the idea and to fight for the future that they believe in.
How how much do the basics and fundamentals of running a business or selling or going to market or creating revenue or adding subscribers, you've got people who are they're breaking the future, they're breaking patterns, they're willing to be contrarians, they're willing to to fight with the presence. But I mean, are there foundational business principles that these individuals still have to adhere to in order to make a startup successful?
They are, but it's interesting because startup founders are a lot more like artists than business people in a lot of ways. So I think that what happens in a startup is you have an idea and then you have to turn it into something. And to do that, you almost have to be like MacGyver, right? You have to juke and jive and figure things out. It's kind of like a improv jazz artist. And then you get to a phase where we figured something out here. Customers want what we're selling. In our business, it's called product market fit. You have a product that the market wants at scale. And when that happens, you start hiring more people and you're hiring now people who need to execute well. You're going from 0 to 1, brand new thing that's never been done before to copying the thing that works at scale. And then you need to hire people who have the process discipline to execute and scale. And so, but that early phase is pretty unique to business. I like to say a startup capitalist creates value in a different way than a normal business person.
How do you know if you're a pattern breaker? Like how would I, if I woke up and said this is who I am, or there's a gap, I'm too caught up in status quo, I'm not willing to look at things differently. Is there like a litmus test that you can use, whether you're a startup founder or you're in sales or you're a leader in an established organization? How do you know?
Yeah, I think that most of the people who have pattern breaking tendencies have a tendency to like to speculate that there's a better way to do something. And so, Pareto, who everybody knows for the 80-20 rule, another one of his insights was that about 85 to 90% of people in society are what he called rentiers. And rentiers don't want to lose a good thing. They like to play by the rules. They feel comfortable following the convention. And most people, whether they like to admit it or not, are rentiers. And there's another type of person he called speculators. And he doesn't mean speculating in terms of gambling. It's speculating in terms of lateral thinking, exploring new possibilities, imagining that there's a better way. And so some people I find are just naturally wired to be speculators, even people in big companies. So quite often, all the founders that I work with are more speculators. And some people would like to be an entrepreneur, but they're really not suited for it, right? They like the romance of being an entrepreneur, but fundamentally, they're better suited for following the rules, and they're better suited to create value that way.
So you've got a sign behind you that says practice reckless optimism. And I keep looking at this sign and coming back to is what does that mean?
Yeah, I think that startups are kind of crazy. Nobody would do it if they were rational. The odds are against you no matter how good the idea is. The early employees would never join if they were being logical. Early customers would never buy if they were being logical. And so you have to have a level of optimism that exceeds normal. So I like to say sometimes you have to believe even when you don't believe, because if you don't believe irrationally, recklessly, optimistically, you won't be able to do the job. There's just too many setbacks. It's just too impossible. And so, you have to look at a startup as a optimistic conspiracy theory to change the future.
Love that. Switching gears just for a moment. I'm an author, written 16 books, and uh, I know how hard it is to write a book. This book, this is a cool book, and everybody should
Thanks.
read this book. And the reason you should read this book is for everything that Mike is saying. This is more than you wrote the book for startups, and I get that, but this is a bigger message than it is startups. It's a new manifesto for how to live in the modern world, where to stand out, you truly have to be willing to go to battle with the present. You have to think differently. You have to force a choice, and these days, especially when you're in sales, like you've got to your pattern breaking or your messaging and what you say and how you say it and how you show up. And I mean, just something basic, Mike. I've been getting in cars with salespeople and my clients and walking indoors. I hadn't walked indoors in 30 years. Like knocked on a door, it's insane. We're walking
Yeah.
indoors and we're walking into boardrooms and sitting down with groups of stakeholders and having sales meetings. I was with a rep back in December. We walked in the door on a pure cold call and sold $400,000 deal. It's crazy.
Easy.
So it's a total pattern breaker because nobody's there and nobody even recognizes it. Like there's in the old days, you walk into a door like you went on a cold call in the door, they would throw you out. Today, they're
Mm,
like giving you the home address of the boss. It's
yeah.
wild. That's a pattern breaker. So this book is inspirational in that it forces you to change the way that you're thinking about how you're going to market, how you're doing business, even by the way, how you're living your personal life. So I think everybody should read the book. My question for you after that nice book plug, that was
Yeah.
gratuitous,
Thanks. That's nice.
but you deserve it, is what inspired you to write this book? And can you tell us a little bit about the process that you use to build the book, including the excruciating details about how hard it was?
Yeah. So there's a couple levels that I might answer that at. Um, Maybe I should zoom out some for those of your audience who aren't going to start the next Twitter, right? Necessarily. Um, when I was a kid, if you'd asked me who's the most famous person in business, I would have probably said Jack Welch of GE, uh, or John Akers at IBM, um, Sam Walton at Walmart, maybe. Uh, I don't know who the CEO of IBM is anymore, and I don't know who the CEO of GE is anymore. But when I drive home in a Tesla, and I trip over Amazon boxes on the way up to the house, and I realized that the pattern breakers are the business people who are changing the world right now. My kids know who Elon Musk is, and they know who Jeff Bezos is, and they knew who Steve Jobs was. And so I think we're going through a very fundamental shift. In the 20th century, you had the organization man. you got ahead by being agreeable, by fitting within the context, and by moving up the hierarchy. I don't think that's the way the world is anymore. I think the world is now completely online and everybody's like a node on a network. The people who are winning are the pattern breakers. They're the people who are winning are the ones who change the rules and tell the rest of us how to think about it. And I just see it happen over and over again. I see it happen in politics. I see it happen in business. It's happening across the board. And I think that we're going to continue to see that. And so some changes happen hidden in plain sight, but slowly. And I think this is one of them. When I was a kid, being taught to be a pattern follower was a durable strategy. I don't think it is anymore. I don't think the rewards for being a rule follower are what they once were, but nobody gave anybody the memo, right? Like nobody said, hey, there's a different set of assumptions that things are predicated on now. So part of why I wrote the book was to encourage people to kind of embrace the new realities of how success happens in today's world in the 21st century, not the 20th century. But then the other more tactical reason was I wanted to tell some stories from the front lines about the founders of these breakthrough startups and what did they do that was different? What can we learn from their success? What are some of the counterintuitive lessons?
I love it. All right, now
Yeah.
the excruciating work that you had to put into writing the book.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Tell me about the writing process.
Well, it took a long time because we rewrote it 4 times. And I'm not trying to get rich being an author. And so I was hoping it would be a good product and we'd come out with a version of it. I didn't like it enough. And so we'd do it again and then we'd do it again. Publishers were getting a little frustrated with me. But but it was fun because it just you know this, when you write a book, it forces you to clarify your thinking. And so that was really helpful. So it helped me understand the realities of my job better than I really understood it at first. So that was good. I'm not sure I've got another one in me, but it was worth doing.
You know, you might. The only way that I can describe writing a book to people is it's at least for a man, right? And but I've heard women describe it the same way. It's the closest thing that a man will come to having a baby because
That might be true.
it is so painful coming out that you swear you'll never do it again, but then
Yeah.
you forget and then you want to do another one. And I'm 16 in, and I got the 17th right now that we're writing,
Wow.
and every time I do it, I'm shocked that I'm doing this again because it's just so hard. Like doing 4 different rewrites. I don't think people understand like how difficult it is to take a book that you've written and then you read it and you go, "This is no good." And this happened to me this summer. I've got a book called Fanatical Prospecting Sequences that everybody's waiting to come out. I spent several months writing and writing and writing, sat down with my developmental editor. She went through it. I didn't feel great about it. She came back and said, I'm just not feeling this thing. And I'm like, I got to rewrite. I got to start all over again because this isn't the message that I want to send. It was just too academic. Um, it's, and sometimes it's just hard to capture magic in a bottle twice, right? So, Fanatical Prospecting was just one of those books, but that's hard because all of a sudden, like, you gotta put your ego away and go, "This wasn't that great," after all that all and
Yeah.
you're doing it with a co-author, which is even harder.
Well, the other thing I find hard is that it reminds me more of writing code than I thought it would. When you're talking to somebody, you have a chance to explain what you said. Jeb, you can say, "Hey, what did you mean by that?" Forcing a choice. And I can say, "Oh, well, consider the Cybertruck." There's an example. But when somebody's reading your book, you're not sitting there in the margin ready to answer questions, right? The book has to communicate what it says for what it is, 100%. And so, like, when you're writing a paragraph or saying something in a certain way, there's a level of precision required that you can't get away with when you're just talking off the cuff. And so that was hard for me to get used to.
I think I'm taking away from this conversation with you is, first of all, I'm inspired, and I think, you know, I just go back and look because we've been in business for 18 years. I feel like we started yesterday. I feel like we're a startup. I treat the business like a startup, but I don't know that we're doing a good enough job of breaking patterns in our own right. And we need to. And I recognize that we need to make some changes, and we're doing that. We're hiring, bringing people on like Simone. You didn't see her; she's off camera, but bringing people on like Simone that can come in and like push us a little bit. But I also took away this concept of forcing a choice to me truly resonates because if I go back and think about myself as a salesperson, that's exactly what I did. When I'm working with a company, I'm going to force you to make a choice. And if you're not willing to make a choice, then I'm walking away. But you're going to have to do something differently. And sometimes that's through the questions that I'm asking you. I'm asking you a question that forces you to get out of your comfort zone and say, you know what? We're not doing that. Or I'm giving you a business case that is so good that it compels you to decide I'm either going to stay where I am or I'm going to move to a better future state. If I'm
Yep.
prospecting, I'm forcing you to make a choice of not meeting with me or meeting with me and creating enough FOMO for not meeting with me that you have to decide like it's here in your in your heart. Uh, and I think it's just a brilliant concept that we can all take away. Um, Mike, just I want to give you a final word just to give our audience your best advice. You've got all this experience. You may be the smartest person we've ever had on the show. I mean, your background, people need to look you up, Mike Maples Jr., and we'll get your contact information. But the work that you've done is extraordinary, and who you are as a person is extraordinary. I'm interested in just giving you the final word to for our folks, just advice that you would give the 23, 24-year-old, the 50-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, all the
Mm.
leaders, salespeople, business owners that are listening from your perspective, what can they do different today to be better tomorrow?
I'd say that life is short. Uh, every day you have is a gift. And so whenever you wake up that day, you should say, what can I do to best honor the gift of my time? And too often life comes at us, and we need to be more intentional about saying, if I was living my highest purpose, if I was living in such a way that I was maximally exploiting my unique comparative advantages, the things I'm passionate about, things I can get paid for, the things the world needs. Um, if I'm doing that every day, that's how I can honor the gift of my time. And then someday, I don't know how much time I'll have, maybe not much, maybe a whole lot, but I'll be able to say I honored the gift of my time. And you'll be able to look back on it and enjoy it twice because you'll have the memories of doing that. But a lot of people, they just kind of go through life and it comes at them, and 20 years goes by, 30 years goes by, and it's like, what happened to the time? That's the greatest tragedy. And so I think that understanding how you want to take advantage of your unique opportunity to exist in this world and to do that thing is how you honor the gift. And so that's what I would advise people.
I love
And
that.
it doesn't matter whether it's sales or entrepreneurship or whatever. Just whatever you know you were put here for, do that thing and honor the gift of your time.
Love that. How can people
Yeah.
find you?
Probably best is well, I have a Substack called patternbreakers.substack.com. On Twitter, I'm M2JR. Those are probably the best ways.
Okay, perfect. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. We've been trying to get this thing scheduled for a long time. This was a
Cool.
wonderful conversation. It's going to impact a lot of people, and we truly appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend it with us.
Well, thanks for taking the risk of having a VC on your show.
I love it. We need to have more VCs. It was a great conversation. And folks, if you haven't checked out Sales Gravy University, you want to go to learn.salesgravy.com, learn.salesgravy.com. If you want to become a pattern breaker, if you want to learn how to go out and close more, sell more, win more, earn more, do it like thousands of salespeople all over the globe on Sales Gravy University. Go to learn.salesgravy.com, learn.salesgravy.com. And if you've never taken a course before, you can take your very first course for free using the code FREE COURSE. We'll see you next time on the Sales Gravy Podcast. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please make sure to click like and subscribe so you never miss a single video. And if you want more sales training content, go to learn.salesgravy.com.